Time held still inside the abandoned room, as if the desert air itself refused to disturb what remained. Dust hovered above the floor in thin, trembling strands. A single chair stood crooked, casting a long shadow across peeling linoleum. On the wall, the faint outline of something once taped there lingered like a memory trying to reappear. And in the center, a rusted metal latch hung open, as though someone had left in a hurry and never returned. This was where everything began, the place where a young woman's final quiet moment had slipped from view and into mystery. The investigator stepped inside, careful, controlled, moving with the deliberate calm of someone revisiting an old decision. His shoes pressed lightly against the cracked surface. He inhaled, the scent of dry earth mixing with stale air. The room carried the silence of a long-forgotten puzzle. He paused, lifting his gaze toward the faded corner near the rear wall. That was where they found her, Mariel Solena, age 26, a bookstore clerk known among friends for her quiet intellect and soft presence. Her life was described through fragments: a studio apartment, stacks of used novels, weekend desert hikes, a part-time photography habit that filled her shelves with sunlit landscapes. Nothing about her life suggested conflict, yet something had led her into this lonely structure on the outskirts of Phoenix, near the edge of a dried creek bed. On the evening she vanished, she had told a coworker she was heading home early. She never arrived. The original investigation unfolded slowly. Officers had circled the room, their voices low, their notebooks filling with measured observations. Though the scene held stillness, a kind of subtle tension radiated from the overturned chair, the open latch, and the faint trail of shoe impressions that disappeared before reaching the entrance. Mariel's belongings contained nothing unusual: a paperback novel, a key ring with a single charm, a small silver pen engraved with her initials. No neighbors heard anything. No one reported seeing another car parked nearby. The area lacked cameras. The desert soil resisted impressions. Time, heat, and isolation all worked against them. The official file remained thin. Her family carried the unanswered story through the years. Photographs of her smile faded gently, edges softening. Birthdays passed quietly. The unsolved case became a name spoken in hushed tones, a reminder of a moment that never received closure. Now, decades later, the investigator stood where he once had stood as a younger officer, feeling the weight of memory settle across his shoulders. He reached out and touched the wall, fingertips tracing the faint marks left behind by something once taped there. The gesture felt like reaching toward a ghost. A soft breeze slipped through a cracked window, shifting dust across the floor. The sound stirred something inside him, a recollection of that night in 1988, the distant lights of patrol cars flickering across open desert, the quiet voices of officers searching for meaning in the scattered details. The investigator crouched near the center of the room. The desert sun cast long beams across the worn floor, revealing the subtle texture of sand grains carried indoors over the years. The scene had changed, but its stillness remained exactly the same, as if waiting for someone to finally understand. He opened his notebook. The case had been unsolved for nearly 40 years, but the silence was about to shift. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. It began with a simple phone call, brief, formal, yet carrying the kind of tone that altered the trajectory of dormant cases. A box had surfaced. A storage facility near Glendale was clearing older units, and among the items was a crate labeled with the year 1988. Inside it lay files, slides, and sealed envelopes belonging to a retired forensic technician who had passed away peacefully in a small care home months earlier. His belongings were being cataloged, and one envelope bore the name Mariel Solena. The envelope was delivered to the department's archives. A clerk recognized the case number and notified the cold case unit. When the investigator opened it, he found a single plastic sleeve containing a strip of aged photographic negatives, images taken during the original processing of the scene but never printed. Each frame held frozen fragments of a place he knew by memory, yet the angles were different, closer, more deliberate. The technician had likely duplicated the photos for personal review, intending to print them later. But the images remained untouched inside storage for decades. The negatives were digitized carefully. The first displayed the chair, the second the latch, the third footprints faintly illuminated by an angled beam of light. But the fourth image was the one that changed everything. It showed the same wall the investigator had touched earlier, but in the 1988 image, the taped object was still there. A rectangular piece of paper, partially torn on the upper left corner. On it, the blurred silhouette of handwriting could be seen. The angle made it difficult to read, but something was visible, a short word followed by a longer phrase. The technician had captured it moments before someone removed it for examination. Yet that document never appeared in the official file. It had vanished. The rediscovered photograph suggested the possibility of forgotten evidence, a note, perhaps, or a message. Something Mariel may have seen just before her final moments, or something left for her, or something left after she was already gone. The investigator reviewed the earlier reports. Nowhere was this paper mentioned. It was as if it had never existed. A quiet pressure formed inside him, the sense of having missed something essential long ago. The case reopened formally within 48 hours. The abandoned room was secured again, old evidence logs rechecked, and retired officers contacted for recollections. One officer remembered seeing a small paper, but assumed it belonged to another unit. Another recalled handing a loose item to a superior, but couldn't remember the details. Several individuals retired shortly after the case went cold, and memory had blurred. Still, there was enough for the investigator to return with a digitized enlargement of the photo. He held the printout under the fractured desert light inside the room, positioning it where the original document had once been. The faint letters aligned with a small discoloration on the wall, an area where adhesive had lightly stained the paint. The letters on the paper were barely readable, but one thing stood out. The final word appeared to be tomorrow. The investigator stared at it for a long, quiet moment. A message containing the word tomorrow suggested intent, an appointment, a promise, a plan, or a warning. For the first time in years, the case offered direction. He turned toward the open doorway, hearing the soft rumble of distant traffic carried across desert air. This new piece didn't solve the case, but it shifted the foundation. It introduced purpose where there once was only absence. He felt the return of something he had not experienced since the early days of the investigation: momentum. And with momentum came responsibility. Investigator examines past reports to identify overlooked details. He entered the records room with slow, deliberate steps, carrying the enlarged photograph as though it were something fragile. Shelves stretched in long corridors of aging files, their labels softened by time and storage dust. The room was cool, quiet, and smelled faintly of paper and old ink. The investigator opened the case box again, sifting through the original documents with renewed attention. Each page carried its own silence: interview transcripts, officer observations, evidence notes, autopsy summaries, all written in careful, professional script, yet lacking the sense of urgency the photograph now imposed. He traced his fingers along the margin of one report that mentioned a faint adhesive mark on the wall, marked but not explained. It had seemed unimportant then. The chaotic desert conditions had overwhelmed smaller details. Continuing through the files, he found an early witness statement from a passing motorist who claimed to see a parked vehicle near the creek bed the evening of Mariel's disappearance. The description was vague, a light-colored sedan, dismissed at the time because several similar vehicles frequented the area. The license number had been partially noted, then crossed out due to uncertainty. He examined it closely now. The handwriting stuttered slightly, as if the officer recording it had been uncertain or rushed. He circled the partial digits and set the page aside. Another report mentioned an item found near the exterior, a small metal object, smooth on one side, textured on the other. It had been classified as debris unrelated to the scene, but the description reminded him of something. He leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. Mariel had owned a silver pen. The cap of that pen had never been recovered. Only the pen body was found among her belongings. He paused, letting the thought settle quietly. If the missing cap had been found outside but dismissed, it meant Mariel had likely been holding the pen when something interrupted her, or she had dropped it, or someone else had taken it. He returned to the photograph, the taped paper on the wall, a message written by whom, for whom, and why remove it before documentation. He reviewed officer assignments that day. At least 4 individuals had entered the room before evidence protocols were fully established. Any of them could have removed the paper intentionally or unintentionally, yet none remembered doing so when contacted recently. He turned to Mariel's background file. She had no documented conflicts, no strained relationships, no signs of distress. She lived alone, worked quietly, and rarely engaged in disputes. Her personal belongings reflected stability, routine, and a strong professional ethic. But there was one more detail. She had recently been planning to attend a photography meetup scheduled for the weekend following her disappearance. The location was listed as a historic market several miles away. A name was written beside the event coordinator's line, first name only. The investigator underlined it, Alden. The name appeared once more in the file, in a coworker's statement. Mariel had mentioned meeting someone named Alden regarding her outdoor photography hobby. Yet no formal interview with anyone by that name existed in the case folder. He set that page aside as well, another oversight. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. The room felt heavier, as if the decades-old case pressed inward from all sides. He stared at the walls of files, thousands of lives, thousands of stories, and returned his focus to the single unanswered one before him. Time had thinned the paper edges, but the truth had not vanished. It was simply buried beneath years of quiet assumptions. He closed the box gently. There were 2 overlooked names, a missing document, and a photograph that shouldn't exist. And all of it pointed to the same conclusion. Something crucial had been missed. Something small. Something that, once uncovered, would shift everything. The desert sky dimmed into soft gold as the investigator drove toward the district office, his thoughts drifting through the fragments spread across his desk earlier. The case had been quiet for years, undisturbed, shapeless. Now it carried outlines, faint, unsteady, but present. Each clue introduced people, and each person introduced motives that had once seemed non-existent. He began assembling the list the moment he returned to his office. The walls hummed with the sound of ventilation, and the late afternoon light stretched through the blinds in thin, motionless bars. He placed a clean sheet at the center of his desk and wrote the first name, Alden, the photography contact Mariel had mentioned. A file search revealed little, A first name, an event organizer at the time, no clear address. Yet a record from a local photography club included an attendee log. A single signature matched the name Alden. No surname. But a comment scribbled beside the list caught his attention. Drives white sedan. The memory of the partial vehicle description surfaced. A coincidence, or simply a detail overlooked during early screening. The investigator retrieved the original log and traced the handwriting. It leaned slightly left, deliberate, the same style seen on the event notice in Mariel's calendar. If Alden had arranged the meetup, he might have been one of the last individuals she contacted before her disappearance. Next name, Elias Rowan, a colleague who worked with Mariel during evening shifts. The statements from 1988 described him as cooperative, quiet, and respectful. He had remained on the periphery of the case, and nothing suggested conflict. Yet one coworker had mentioned that Mariel and Elias had recently discussed a project involving local bookstores and photography for a community event. A collaboration, simple and routine, but the timing aligned closely with the days before her disappearance. A background check from the period showed Elias worked part-time at a nearby publishing warehouse. He had access to storage spaces and delivery routes that stretched toward the outskirts. His alibi from that day stated he was at home, preparing materials for the event. No additional verification existed. With limited resources in 1988, investigators had accepted his statement. Then came the third name, Mariel's landlord, a quiet, older man known for being methodical. He lived on the property and oversaw maintenance. While he had no documented issues with her, he had been one of the last people to see her the day before she vanished. His statement explained their brief conversation about plumbing repairs. His alibi, managing routine maintenance on another property, seemed reasonable, but due to overlapping schedules and lack of documentation, nothing firmly confirmed it. The investigator also considered a fourth individual, a passerby, the motorist who reported the light-colored vehicle near the creek bed. The witness had remained anonymous in the file, but early reports mentioned he lived in a small town west of Phoenix. No follow-up interview had been conducted. He had simply phoned the station and left the message. If he had seen something or someone, his memory might hold something still. And finally, the missing document itself introduced a silent suspect, the person who removed it. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, someone had taken a key piece of evidence from the wall. If the message included the word tomorrow, then whoever removed it may have known what was written on it. If the message referenced a meeting, a time, or a person, it could reshape the entire timeline. The investigator arranged these names on a board, connecting strings of possibility. The air felt still. The quiet weight of the reopened case fell neatly into place. He began interviews the following morning. Interview 1, Elias Rowan. Elias lived in a small suburban house, its yard trimmed neatly, the porch empty except for a chair placed under a shaded corner. He greeted the investigator with a soft, cautious nod. "I remember her," he said quietly, pausing before continuing. "She was thoughtful." His answers were simple, measured. He described their project, their conversations, their routine work schedules. When asked about the evening she vanished, he hesitated, looking toward the distant outline of the mountains. "I stayed home that night," he said softly. "I had reading to finish." No verification, no details beyond that. Yet something in his tone felt restrained, as if he held back out of uncertainty rather than misdirection. The investigator noted the hesitation. Interview 2, Landlord. He spoke with steady rhythm, describing the repairs planned for Mariel's apartment. He recalled seeing her carrying a small envelope a day before she vanished, one she placed in her bag before leaving. When asked if he remembered anything unusual, he paused. "There was a car," he murmured, "light-colored, maybe white, parked across the street that morning." A second mention of a white vehicle. Interview 3, the motorist. Reaching him took time, but the man still lived in the same town, older now, memory softened by years. He recalled driving through the area as the sun dipped low. "I saw a car near the creek bed," he said. "White, maybe silver, someone standing near it, but the dust made it hard to see." When asked to describe the figure, he simply shook his head. "Just movement, that's all." Interview 4, Photography Club Contact. After tracing sign-up logs and regional photography groups from the late 80s, the investigator located an address belonging to the organizer's family. The club had disbanded decades earlier. A family member provided a name, Alden Pierce, a quiet, outdoors-oriented individual who traveled frequently for photography. No known records placed him near Mariel's location, but the family mentioned he had often visited the creek area for landscape work. Alden never appeared in the original investigation. The alibi logs for him were non-existent. His name, missing from the case file, now rose closer to the center. The investigator pinned each suspect to the board and stepped back. The air in the office felt tighter, denser, the quiet echoing in the space between details. Every person had a plausible presence in the timeline. Every person had a reason to cross paths with Mariel. Every person carried something unsaid. But only one would match the truth hidden in that missing note. Clues emerged slowly, linking inconsistencies to emotional conflicts. The investigator returned to the evidence table, laying documents side by side. The negatives, the photo of the missing note, the partial vehicle details, the pen cap, the witness statements. Each piece felt like a quiet whisper from the past, subtle yet persistent. He lifted the digitized image of the note once more. The letters remained faint, blurred, yet the last word, tomorrow, continued to hold weight. He leaned closer, examining the top edge. The tear line suggested it had been removed with haste, not care. Whoever took it may have done so impulsively, possibly reacting to what was written. A message that prompted a personal response, something that stirred caution, concern, or urgency. He reopened Mariel's calendar logs from the week she vanished. The entry for the meetup listed a time, Friday, photos by creek, sunset. Initialed beside the entry were 2 letters, AP. Alden Pierce. A small but meaningful connection. If Alden had planned a photography session that evening, Mariel might have visited the location before meeting him, or they planned to meet there. If so, the creek bed, the site of her disappearance, was not a random place. The investigator returned to Elia's interview notes. Elias had hesitated when asked about the project they were working on. Something about his pause had carried a quiet internal weight. He had looked away when responding. It did not imply wrongdoing, but it did suggest something unsaid. He reviewed Elias' background further. A receipt found inside his old personnel file showed a repair for his car around that week, a light-colored sedan. The work order listed minor adjustments to the rear tires and headlamps. Coincidence or relevance, hard to know. But then came the landlord's remark, Mariel carrying a small envelope before her disappearance. Nothing in the case file mentioned such an envelope. If she had written something or received something, the missing paper on the wall could have connected to it. The investigator's attention turned toward the pen cap again. Found outside but dismissed. If Mariel dropped it while writing or reading something, whoever saw her last might have watched her use it. Another detail emerged from the photography club list. Alden often wrote notes to members, occasionally leaving small paper reminders during events. His handwriting leaned left, the same direction as the writing on the meetup notice found in Mariel's belongings. The torn paper in the photograph also featured script leaning left. A quiet realization settled in. If the script matched, then Alden may have written the missing document. He traced the possibility. If Alden wrote the note and the note said something about tomorrow, then perhaps he arranged a follow-up meeting. If he removed it after the incident, it could be an attempt to protect privacy, not interfere with the investigation. Or it could mean something deeper, an emotional conflict, a moment of concern or confusion. But then came another detail, subtle, nearly missed. In the photograph of the wall, the taped note hung slightly crooked. The tape placement indicated the document was applied with the left hand. Most right-handed individuals place tape differently. Angles reveal wrist motion. But left-handed tape placement tilts a certain way. Alden was left-handed, according to a note in a club registration form. Elias was right-handed. The landlord was right-handed. The motorist unknown, but unlikely relevant. Only one consistent thread lined up with the tape placement, the handwriting direction, the meetup, and the creek bed location. The investigator wrote the name again, in the center of the board. Alden Pierce. The clues, faint and unforced, began aligning themselves not through chance but through steady, quiet logic. Yet something felt incomplete, something small, a final missing piece resting just beyond reach. The investigator sensed it, a detail that would carry everything forward, shifting the path toward a truth long buried under desert dust. He looked again at the photograph of the torn paper, the faint curve of letters, the crooked angle. This time, when he leaned closer, he noticed a shadow behind the note, faint, nearly invisible, as if something had been taped beneath it before. A second layer. A second message. Something hidden. Something that might explain the emotional fracture at the center of the case. The investigator froze, then slowly reached for the magnification tool. The investigator studied the faint shadow beneath the torn paper for a long, motionless moment. The magnifier revealed something almost spectral, a barely visible outline of adhesive residue shaped like the corner of a second page. Whatever had once been there had been removed earlier than the top note. The technician's photograph had captured only the upper layer before it too vanished. 2 notes. One displayed in the photograph. One missing entirely. He reopened every written statement related to early entry into the scene. Names of first responders, officers, civil staff. One entry, short and almost dismissed, described the building's caretaker unlocking the door for the responding team on the first night. He had entered briefly to switch on a light before stepping aside. The caretaker. Not the landlord at Mariel's apartment, but the individual responsible for this abandoned structure in 1988. The investigator pulled the original caretaker's file. The man, Rayan Holt, had been in charge of the property for several years before relocating out of state. He was described as calm, cooperative, organized. He had no direct connection to Mariel, and no one had ever considered him beyond a routine presence at the scene. But something in his initial statement stood out now. I stepped inside and turned on the switch near the wall. The same wall with the taped note. The investigator leaned back, the slow realization forming with steady clarity. If Rayan switched on the light, he would have approached the same area where the layered notes hung. If he touched something, Intentionally or absent-mindedly, he might have altered the scene before documentation began. But the deeper question lingered. Why would he have reason to remove anything? He examined the caretaker's employment forms. In the emergency contacts section, a name appeared, Elias Rowan. The connection struck like the quiet click of a puzzle piece. Elias the coworker. Elias, who hesitated during his interview. Elias, whose alibi lacked verification. Elias, whose car matched the partial description. Elias had listed Ray and Holt as his contact, meaning their lives intersected in a quiet but meaningful way. Perhaps they were relatives, perhaps long-time acquaintances. Either way, their connection had never appeared in the original investigation. The investigator retrieved city records. Rayan and Elias shared a residential address years before the case, a small home near Glendale. They had lived there together for several months. Their relationship was not documented, but they were clearly close. He compared their timelines. Rayan accepted the caretaker's job near the creek bed. Elias worked with Mariel. Both were present in different ways around the day of her disappearance. Yet the deeper twist was still emerging. The investigator examined the digitized image again, rotating it slightly. The faint letters beneath the top note seemed to follow a different handwriting style, larger strokes, more spaced. Unlike Alden's left-leaning script, this one leaned right. A right-handed writer. Only one suspect thus far matched that consistently, Elias. The investigator closed his eyes briefly, letting the quiet logic settle. If Elias wrote a first note, then Alden may have written the second or vice versa. But the order mattered. The adhesive layering suggested the right-leaning script had been taped first. That meant the top note, the one the technician photographed, belonged to someone else. The bottom note, the one removed earlier, belonged to Elias. This explained Rayan's involvement. If he saw the first note, something written by someone close to him, he may have reacted instinctively, removing it before fully understanding the consequences. Perhaps to protect someone, or out of confusion, or out of fear that the message revealed something too personal. The investigator reconstructed the sequence. 1. Elias writes a message to Mariel. 2. He meets her, intentionally or unintentionally, near the creek bed. 3. Something occurs, an argument, a moment of confusion, a misunderstanding, nothing violent in wording, but enough to create emotional tension. 4. Alden arrives later, finds the message on the wall, and posts his own note over it, likely confirming a meeting for the next day. 5. After the incident, when Rayan enters the building to turn on the light, he sees the layered notes. Recognizing Elias' handwriting, he removes the bottom one, leaving Alden's above it. 6. The removal goes unnoticed because the second responding officer focuses on the upper note, the one that later disappears too. The investigator sat in silence, piecing together the emotional undertones. This was not a calculated act. It was something smaller, quieter, shaped by hesitation rather than planning. He returned to Elias' interview notes, the subtle pauses, the quiet voice, the way he shifted his gaze when describing that week, as if something unspoken hovered just behind his words. He requested archives for recordings of dispatcher calls from that month. One recording emerged, a brief call made by Elias days after the incident, requesting information about whether officers had found anything written at the scene. When asked why, Elias had simply said he wanted to ensure that all details were preserved for the investigation. But the phrasing was too specific. He hadn't asked about items or belongings or evidence. He asked about anything written. The investigator re-entered the abandoned room once more. The light filtered through the small cracks in the structure, the dust lifting like strands of forgotten memory. He stood in the exact spot where the note had once hung, imagining Elias placing his message there. A sentiment, perhaps, or an apology, or a request for a meeting. Something simple, delicate, written in soft strokes. Something that might have brought Mariel to this location, expecting conversation. He imagined her reading the message, reaching into her bag, pulling out her pen, opening the cap. And then, mid-action, something shifted the direction of that evening. A misunderstanding, a raised voice, a quiet step backward, a moment where communication fractured. Nothing intentional. Nothing planned. Something human. Elias' right-handed script, beneath Alden's left-handed message. Two lives overlapping in quiet ways Mariel never realized. The investigator closed his notebook slowly. The truth was not cinematic. It was steady, quiet, emerging through logic rather than drama. No elaborate plan, no hidden motive, only a chain of small choices, each shaping the next. And standing at the center of it was the least suspected person. A gentle, composed coworker who had lived with a truth folded into careful silence. Ends with moral reflection. Truth isn't always visible on surface. Days later, the investigator delivered his findings. The board filled with photographs, timelines, adhesive marks, handwriting direction, and evidence logs. It painted a quiet narrative not of intention, but of human missteps and connections never fully understood. The case reached resolution through clear reasoning. Elias, confronted with the layered evidence, spoke in short, hesitant fragments. His words were restrained, almost weightless, describing a conversation between him and Mariel that evening. He admitted leaving a message for her earlier in the day, a request to speak about their upcoming project, something he felt uncertain about. When he found her near the creek, she seemed distracted, reading Alden's note instead of his. Their conversation drifted into confusion. She stepped back toward the open latch, startled by a sound from outside. Her fall happened in silence. He never tried to remove evidence from the scene. That was Rayan, who reacted upon seeing the familiar handwriting, removing the bottom note in a moment of instinct, unaware of its importance. Neither realized how the layered papers would alter everything. The investigation ended with formal documentation, a quiet report that felt almost mechanical in its completion. No dramatic confession, no bold pronouncement, only the steady unfolding of truth. Later that evening, the investigator returned to the abandoned room one final time. The air settled into stillness, carrying the soft scent of dust and old wood. The chair stood unmoved. The wall remained bare, except for the faint outline where the two notes once rested, a subtle imprint of words long gone. He knelt beside the cracked floor, touching the space where the pen cap was found decades earlier. The sunlight filtered through broken panes, painting gentle lines across the ground. Everything looked ordinary now, unremarkable, as though the years had quietly smoothed the edges of memory. Yet something human stayed behind, a presence woven into the room's silence. Mariel's story, once suspended in uncertainty, now rested in quiet clarity. Not perfect, not complete, but understood. He stood slowly, letting the light fall across the space one more time. Some cases end with certainty, others with questions. But this one carried something different, a reminder that truth often lies in the smallest details, the overlooked fragments, the soft marks on a wall where two notes once met. He walked toward the doorway, footsteps gentle, leaving the room exactly as it had always felt, dim, still, holding both resolution and absence in the same breath. Justice had been done. Yet a subtle ache lingered, the understanding that truth, no matter how clear, rarely reveals the full shape of what once lived beneath it. And somewhere in that quiet space, the human part remained,